any policy to be implemented appropriately has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, emotionally relatable, and environmentally sustainable.
Well, to welcome our guest today, Mr. Anil Swarup, sir, a distinguished retired police officer, an author, and the founder and the chairman of Nexus of Good, which promotes stories of positive governance. During his illustrious career spanning 38 years, he navigated various turbulent situations from the Babri merger with Ram Janmabhoomi agitation to handling the aftermath of the coal scam as the coal secretary of India. He has been involved in making of various policies such as Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana and Ayushman Bharat.
So, as we know that democracy is meant to be a government of people, by people and for the people.
Democracy is being able to express your views between those 5 years when you vote. Democracy is actually being able to contribute in your own way, positive or negative, in discussions, in actions, because it's not merely voting that makes the country democratic.
Hello everyone, welcome to the first episode of the second season of Policy Podcast, an initiative by the Public Policy and Governance Society, IIT Kharagpur. I am Ashmi.
And I'm Anora. The Public Policy and Governance Society provides a dynamic platform for impassioned students to rigorously examine, deliberate upon, and actively engage with public policy and governance issues. Policy Podcast is an online event dedicated to exploring key issues in policy and governance, featuring expert interviews and insightful discussions.
We are thrilled to welcome our guest today, Mr. Anil Swarup, sir, a distinguished retired police officer, an author, and the founder and the chairman of Nexus of Good, which promotes stories of positive governance. During his illustrious career spanning 38 years, he navigated various turbulent situations from the Babri merger with Ram Janmabhoomi agitation to handling the aftermath of the coal scam as the coal secretary of India. He has been involved in making of various policies such as Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana and Ayushman Bharat. This showcases his expertise in policymaking and its implementation. Um,
So, so we'd like to invite you to just talk to your, just introduce yourself a little bit.
Please go ahead.
So, so then let's move on to the questions.
Please go ahead.
So, Nexus of Good is an organization that's committed to spreading positivity in a world that's surrounded by negativity. In that light, how do you feel that positive or negative narratives and the way that things are put forward in front of the public shape their understanding of them? And how does this understanding affect that public support to affect outcomes?
See, first of all, in a country like ours in India, we are very fond of masala. So we are very attracted to negative news. Natural inclination is to something which is negative. So it is not very easy to ask people to think in terms of positive things or positive, especially when it comes to news, because the nation wants to know apparently only negative things. So we revel in discussing negative things. Two friends chatting will not be praising a third person who's not present. They would actually enjoy criticizing somebody who's not present there. That's a very natural inclination. But I had come to understand during the course of my career that there's so much good work that is happening around us. The question was, can we provide a platform where such good activities could be highlighted? That was the key. There is a recognition of the fact that there are so many good things happening. There is also recognition of the fact that these don't tend to be noticed. And there's also recognition of the fact that even when they get noticed, they don't get to be discussed or propagated. So the whole idea of Nexus Good was to provide a platform where good things could be discussed, propagated, so that those that have doubts about good things happening around us can see that good can happen because good is actually happening. And they can perhaps seek inspiration from good work that is being done by some people around. So that's the essence of Nexus Good, that if all the rascals and the ruffians of the world can come together and make life difficult for us, why shouldn't good people come together and spread goodness?
so, moving on to the next question. So, Anora and I are part of the policy research team at Public Policy and Governance Society. And as a team, the goal has always been to critically analyze the policies to present the pros and cons to the public. But to do it meaningfully, it is essential to understand the mindset behind policymaking. Much of your work, from initiatives like Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana to Ayushman Bharat, resulted in measurable on-ground outcomes. How do you approach policy making from identifying the problems to designing solutions? And what principles have guided you in ensuring effective implementation on the ground?
Wherever a policy gets formulated, there is an objective behind a policy. Why a policy? What is the need for a scheme or a policy? So that objective has to be clearly understood. If there is not a clarity in understanding of the objective, then obviously you can't formulate a policy. So that is one. Second, when you work out the policy, you have to see whether what is being proposed fulfills the objectives that are designed for it. And for that, there has to be some target group, there has to be some target, and the next step then should be to try and understand the nature of the target group. The reason why RSBY or Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana succeeded was that we looked at very intensively at the consumer, that is the beneficiary, his nature. For example, this beneficiary was poor and hence he could not pay the money in advance and claim the amount from insurance company. He did not have money to pay. So the scheme had to be cashless. Then this person who was poor, by and large illiterate as well, he could not read the fine prints of an insurance policy. So the policy had to be paperless. He couldn't carry the policy with him or keep it somewhere in his house. They hardly had a house, a hut. Where would they keep the policy with them? So the policy had to be paperless. And third and most importantly, most of the beneficiaries were traveling from one place to the other in search of employment. So at that point in time, when this policy was formulated way back in 2007, there was no scheme of the government where benefit could accrue to a beneficiary outside his own district, whether it was MNREG or the food distribution policy, PDS. In none of the cases you could get the benefit outside the district. In health insurance, it was all the more necessary because if a person moved out of his own place, the chances are that he would fall sick. So the scheme had to be portable. So the scheme had to be cashless, paperless, and portable. Now, this came out of understanding of the beneficiary. In large number of policies, we don't really try to understand the nature or the limitations of the beneficiary while formulating the policy. So first, the objective has to be very clear. Second, whatever you formulate should be able to fulfill that objective. And third, while doing that, you have to take care of the beneficiary who has to be benefited under the policy, and you have to understand the beneficiary very clearly. Then, of course, you should clearly outline the application or the implementation of the policy. One of the problems in this country is we have fantastic policies, but they don't get implemented properly. Now, implementation of a policy is actually a combination of ideas. It's an articulation of ideas or principles. It is not, the policy itself doesn't get operated. It has to be operationalized. I have often said, for any idea or a policy to be able to sustain over a period of time and to be implemented, it has to be politically acceptable. Obviously, you can't have a policy without the politician accepting it. It has to be socially desirable, meaning thereby you have to take into account what is required by the beneficiary or the society for whom your policy is making. Then it has to be technologically feasible, meaning there has to be technology to implement the policy. Otherwise, you can have a great idea, but the policy will not get implemented because there's no technology. Then it has to be financially viable. You have to have money to implement the policy. One of the problems that the national education policy is facing is that it doesn't have the requisite money to implement the recommendation of the policy. So what is the big deal of having that policy if you don't have the money to implement it? Then it has to be judicially tenable, meaning thereby it has to be legal. If it is contrary to the constitution or any law, it won't work. It has to be administratively doable, meaning thereby you have to have human resource to implement that policy, trained, requisite human resource. So, for example, you may have the best of health policies. If you are unable to get the doctors and the paramedical staff in the field, the policy will not work. Then it has to be emotionally relatable, meaning thereby you should be able to sell that policy to the person concerned. If you are unable to convey the objectives of the policy to the beneficiary, it will not work. And finally, it has to be environmentally sustainable. Anything that is not environmentally sustainable will not go for long. Therefore, any policy to be implemented appropriately has to be politically acceptable, socially desirable, technologically feasible, financially viable, administratively doable, judicially tenable, emotionally relatable, and environmentally sustainable.
When we talk about Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, that was something that was a seriously revolutionary idea. When I read about it, I was very, very impressed by how you basically handled things. So basically, you integrated technology into the dynamic medical field and you introduced elements like smart cards and digital records. You talked about why you introduced these, right? But at that point of time, these were relatively very advanced features. And you also explored a very delicate partnership in public and private sector. And honestly speaking, I really wanted to know more about this. What were some of the challenges that you and your team faced in this
book? Not just a civil servant. Most of it is about the challenges that I faced while implementing the policy. You alluded to two major challenges. One was use of technology. The other was public-private partnership. Yes, technology that we had visualized at that point in time was not being used anywhere in the world. It was the first possible use of technology to make the scheme paperless. So entire thing was moving on this chip in the smart card and the backend software that we had prepared. There were 11 programs that were running this scheme. Front end was very simple. The beneficiary did not have to struggle with the technology, but the backend was extremely complex because it enabled a person to walk into any empaneled hospital. His verification was done through his thumb impression. At that point in time, Aadhaar had not come. We had created a provision of storing his biometric data in the chip, and that could be tested by his real thumb impression in the hospital. And we also stored data about the value of the insurance that was available with him. So these two data were available. He used to get admitted in the hospital, and at the time of discharge, the amount as a part of that procedure, amount that he had to give in that procedure, and these amounts were pre-decided by us, that was deducted from his insurance amount, and he was given back the card. He could just walk out. On the back end, all this data that was collected at the hospital was accumulated and seamlessly transmitted to a central server where the insurance company picked up that data to pay digitally to the hospitals. Now, everything was happening digitally. The data, the health data was getting transferred to the central server here, and that was then getting transferred to insurance company, who in turn was making digital payments to the hospital. You know what this enabled was digital tracking of every transaction. So it becomes very easy for us to monitor what was going on. So this was the digital part. Now come to the public-private partnership. You know, unfortunately, we in the government feel that all private sector people are chores, and everyone in the private sector feels that everyone in the government is corrupt. Both are equally wrong. They're good people on either side of the fence. Now, the reason why there was a necessity of public-private partnership, it was at various levels, but most importantly at the level of hospitals. Now, in any case, the government was providing free treatment to the poor in government hospitals, but everyone knows the quality of facilities that are being given in the hospitals. So we decided to rope in private sector hospitals. Now, this was a major step towards public-private partnership. Even insurance companies earlier, the earlier schemes were run only through public sector companies. Now we allowed private sector companies to come in. So there was huge amount of public-private partnership in terms of providing healthcare, providing insurance cover. So this was on this scale. I don't think there's any other example anywhere in the world where there was such a massive public-private partnership.
Yes, sir. So, but I have a question. Like, how did you ensure that the scheme stayed like public centric while involving the private players and insurers? Like,
You know, that is the beauty of use of technology. You can actually track what is happening. So we could make out which are the procedures being undertaken, what is the payment that is being made. Everything was digitally available. So once it has become digitally available, you don't have to browse through files. It is through data that you could make out. We could, you know, there were still frauds. It's not to say frauds were totally stopped, but we could catch many of them because of the technology. I'll give you a very crude example. You know, a hospital showed that there were 30 patients admitted at one point in time in its hospital, whereas the hospital, it was only 15-bedded hospital. Now, this came up immediately on data that this hospital has 15. We know that data. Now, how can it admit more than? So in one case, it was fraud. In another case, it was not fraud. Because when it was checked, it was found there was epidemic there. There were people who admitted to the hospital and were placed on the floor. They were not on the bed because there was a crisis. So, data allowed you to further examine in a very focused manner as to whether there was fraud happening. I've given you one such example. There are many such examples where we used technology to see that the scheme was implemented appropriately.
Moving on to another really illustrious part of your career, Coalgate was a huge scam that cost the government crores in revenue. When you took over, you shifted the entire system to transparent e-auctions, a huge step, especially considering the state things were in. Despite such public distrust and scrutiny, you managed to establish such a revolutionary system. What were some of the lessons you would want future civil servants to learn? And what did this system entail? What kind of challenges did it entail for you?
The first, I think, lesson was that challenges are there to be enjoyed. I mean, if you get browbeaten by the challenge itself, then you can't overcome that challenge at all. So challenges are a way of life, whether it's government service or otherwise. So challenges will come. It's your attitude that matters a lot. How do you look at a challenge? You look at a challenge to find a solution to it, or you get so down that you are unable to face that challenge. So I enjoyed facing challenges. So that was first thing. Second, I was always on the lookout for the cause of the problem. And that helped not only in coal, even otherwise. I always go to the bottom of the cause of the problem. In coal, everyone thought that scams were a problem. But as I tried to examine it, I discovered that scams were only a symptom of a more serious problem. And serious problem was shortage of coal, because mafias world over thrive on either man-made or natural shortages. In India, unfortunately, India sits on coal of around 300 billion tons. And our requirement at that point in time was less than 1 billion tons. So we could go on for 300 years. But yet we had a shortage of coal. Why? I went to the next layer, that despite the fact so much coal is available, despite the fact that there's so much demand, why are we short of coal? So I understood that coal requires to be excavated from land. So land has to be acquired. That's a very serious problem. How do you acquire land? Second, this land exists in forested areas. So you had to get forest clearance and environment clearance. Third, this land was in inaccessible areas. So you had to have railway lines to get them out. So we identified these three. So it's a long story. I'm not going to narrating the whole thing, but we got down to sorting all these three issues. They are there in my book, Not Just a Civil Servant, where I explain on how do we sort out this problem, so much so that from acute shortage of coal to a point in 2 years where we are planning to export coal to Bangladesh. So that was the growth. In the year 14-15, the coal production increased by 33 million tons, which was more than the cumulative increase over the previous 4 years. And next year, it was another 44 million tons. So we were sitting on coal and there was no demand. We came to that situation. So once that happens, the mafia went out. That was one area. The other, of course, was the auctioning of coal blocks, which we brought in, again, use of technology, a totally transparent system of auctioning coal blocks. So we auctioned coal blocks at that point in time, which was presumably to yield revenue of about 180 lakh crores of rupees, around that amount. And not a finger was pointed because it was totally transparent system. Again, we converted coal ministry into a fileless, paperless office with everything digital. So all that helped. I mean, I'm a great believer that you bring in technology, a lot of problems will get solved.
So moving on to the next question, which is related to this, that could you share how the idea of this auction model came to you? Like, what were the key challenges in turning that idea into action?
See, auction had to be done because by allocating, you did not discover the fair value of that mine. So it is through auction only, when people auction and say how much coal will come out of it, and how much will they get out of it. So it's through auction that you determine. Even otherwise, how do you determine the value of any commodity in the market? By auctioning it or by selling it in the market. When you sell it in the market, that's where the value of or the value of that product comes out. So was the case with coal. So we had to auction it. The critical point was, how do you auction it? I mean, doing auction was no big deal. That was a decision taken. Auction had to be done to determine the fair value of the natural resource. But the key was, how do you auction it? And that's where we brought in a system of auctioning through a technological process where we did some very interesting things. In order to determine the fair value, we said that you provide closed bids for that for the each coal mine, and only the top 50% of the bidders will be allowed to participate in the auction process. So at the first stage itself, there was competition because no one wanted to be left out. And then we started auction. So we got a good price for all the mines. Then it was a very transparent process. You could actually, they used to sit in front of a laptop and you could start bidding. It was as simple as that. You sit in a place, you bid through an auction that of course, there were other measures that we had taken to ensure that only genuine people participated in the auction process. There were certain pre-qualifications that had to be seen.
Sir, I would like to ask one last thing related to this. See, because it was such a huge thing, I wanted to ask, what were the political challenges you faced? At that point of time, even the public was very, very wary of the coal department. And honestly, the government I do not think the government saw it as a very positive thing that happened either. So I wanted to know, what were the political or people-wise challenges that you faced at that point of time?
Fortunately, at that point in time, there was no political challenge. I got all the support because there was already a crisis. And they had picked me up to sort that crisis. For me, it was slightly more bureaucratic than political challenge. Politically, I had all the support they gave me freedom to do it. Bureaucratically, there was a problem that because everyone wanted to monitor. Everyone wants monitoring. In government, everyone wants monitoring. No one wants to work. Everyone wants to be a monitor. So I said, you have given me the responsibility, let me do it. I would not like an external agency to sit and monitor over it. If you want somebody to monitor, let him do the auction. So they agreed with me and I went ahead. But had the auctions gone wrong, I would have been in serious trouble. But I felt that you select the right man, and that's a philosophy that I've always followed. You put in a lot of effort to get the right team, right people, and then don't go and sit on their head. Let them do their job. If you sit on their head, they will not be able to do the job. The usual problem in the government is everyone is monitoring. No one is doing.
So moving on to the next question, it's very different from the topic we have discussed. So as we know that democracy is meant to be a government of people, by people and for the people. But yet we observe that the significant portion of the educated Indians show apathy towards elections. Many don't vote and even fewer engage with or understand government policies. In your opinion, how can we address this disconnect? And do you believe our education system needs to place greater emphasis just not on STEM subjects, but also on civic awareness, subjects like policy and polity, to nurture more informed and responsible citizens?
We all believe that by educating people, they will become educated. Unfortunately, they don't. By adding a book of civics, they will not become civic. It's an attitude that has to be developed over a period of time. And this attitude has to flow from the top. Now, let me start by your initial statement when you say democracy, what democracy is. Democracy is much beyond just voting. Voting is a very essential ingredient of democracy. And it's unfortunate that many educated people don't vote. They should be voting it. And it has nothing to do with education because the uneducated lot vote more. So how do you educate them further? They have to understand that. And there's a different set of things that may be required to do that. The democracy to me is much beyond just voting. Democracy is being able to express your views between those 5 years when you vote. Democracy is actually being able to contribute in your own way, positive or negative, in discussions, in actions, because it's not merely voting that makes the country democratic. I mean, you vote once and then you go silent and don't do anything. To me, that's very dangerous. So voting is essential, but there are many more things that make our democracy a vibrant democracy, where people speak out. It is when people don't speak out and mention their views. And today you have social media. You can actually convey your thoughts and expressions. Some people may listen, some may not listen. But the essential ingredient is your freedom to say what you say without being abrasive or trying to hurt somebody. But the point is making your point of view. So to me, that is important. Now, this can happen more so in a democracy, and especially in a democracy like ours. A lot flows from the top. In India, the messaging part is very important from the top. If the messaging is that, why don't you speak up? Why don't you speak your mind out? Why don't you make your thought known? Then probably most people will speak. But if action gets taken against people who are speaking the mind out, then obviously those who want to speak will also not speak. So unlike elsewhere in the world, I don't know, I've not studied much about the rest in the world, but in India, a lot matters what signals emanate. Like in emergency time, almost everyone was throttled. You wouldn't have been born then, but you were not allowed to speak. So if it comes from the top that you're not allowed to speak, or anything that you speak against the government will be treated as anti-national, then there is trouble. Apart from people who speak against the government being in trouble, there will be trouble for democracy also, because feedback and freedom of expression is an essential ingredient of democracy.
So moving on to one of the questions that I had this question come up. So what is one project that you worked on that you felt had a deep, lasting impact? Not because it was big, but because it actually reached the people it was meant for. Like you always
RSBY.
mention.
RSBY. Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, I'm really proud of. It reached out to crores of people. And so many people benefited, many of whom would have been dead but for this scheme. So it was an amazing scheme. And, you know, a good scheme, irrespective of the nature of the government, revives. This scheme was almost dead for 3 years. And then through a conversation with the Prime Minister, this scheme was revived as Ayushman Bharat. It's there in my book, the incident, how Ayushman Bharat was born. Actually, Ayushman Bharat was born as a consequence of the conversation that I had with the Prime Minister.
So you've always emphasized on the policy being, the importance of a policy being when it reaches the people, when it is actually in action instead of just making policies. And we find that like truly inspiring. Would you like to talk about that?
So as I mentioned earlier when we were discussing, there is an objective of a policy. Policy itself cannot be of anything. It has to deliver something. So you have to look at the deliverables, whether the deliverables as defined in the policies are reaching out. I mean, there is a classic case of RSBY where, if not everything, a lot of things got delivered. A lot of people got benefited. You know, the response, there was an evaluation done of the response of the people who participated. Phenomenal. 80, 90% satisfaction with the scheme. So the scheme did very well. It reached out to these people. Compare that. I mean, it's not right to compare schemes, but I'm just for the sake of discussion I'm putting in here. Look at Make in India. Now, Make in India was to create an impact on employment. You know, that's where the people were to benefit. There were two primary objectives of Make in India. One, that the manufacturing as a part of GDP will grow from 13% to 25%. Second was it will create employment. In both these cases, it didn't serve the purpose. So one has to examine and see why didn't and these are linked objectives, because if manufacturing grows, it was believed, and rightly so, that there will be more employment available. Now, manufacturing did not increase, it's stagnant at 13%. So we must understand, why did it fail? What were the factors? We usually don't do that. We usually don't examine the causes of failure. And I think one of the reasons for Make in India failure was that the focus was more on show than substance. They should have looked at the substantial aspects, areas where manufacturing could increase, where employment could improve. So I don't think that was done. So it was more the lion that was roaring, rather than the lion that was walking. So it hardly walked any distance.
I have a question that how would a bureaucrat or a policymaker ensure that the manufacturing sector is being like.
So let us try and understand. Look at
Yes,
the way I looked at the other questions. Let
Yes,
us
sir.
understand why is not manufacturing sector flourishing? Because
Yes, sir.
in answer to that question, you know what a bureaucrat needs to do. Okay, the first, most of the manufacturing actually gets done, and that creates employment, is by the small and medium scale sector. Now, what are the problems of small and medium scale sector? We have to address those problems. I'll list out only some of them. One, of course, is the processes. You know, they have to run from pillar to post to government offices to get clearances. Now, today, with the use of technology, can you dispense with all this running around and leave them in peace? And this can easily be done. You sit with them and try and understand where are the processes where he has to run around here and there, and then see how technology could be used to streamline the process, digitize the process so that he doesn't have to run around. That's simple as that. Second, he requires finance for running his show. Does he have adequate finance? Is adequate finance available? What are the problems in getting financing? You have to look at that. Then, I mean, anything, capital, labor, land, these are the factors of production. You have to look at these factors of production and see what is the problem. Is he having problems in getting land? Can government solve that problem bringing land? So you have to go into the depth of the cause of the problem. Once you address those causes, then manufacturing will improve. But if I'm interested only in newspaper headlines, because see, small and medium sector will never hit headlines. What will hit headlines is 5,000 crore investment, 10,000 crore investment, big investments. They don't create either huge manufacturing facilities, or if they do, then they don't create so much employment, as do medium small scale sector. So the focus had to be medium small scale sector. Unfortunately, that focus is missing, and it can be done, it should be done, and probably it would be done in the interest of the country, but I don't know when.
So thank you so much for taking the time to be with us today. This conversation has been truly eye-opening, and we're really grateful for your insights.
Thank you. God bless you. Take care. I've been wanting to come to Kharagpur, but it's pretty far off, not available on, there's no airport around it, so I've not been able to come there. Maybe someday I'll come. I visited all other IITs except Kharagpur.
So we'll definitely make some arrangements.
God bless you.
Yes, sir.
Take care.
So it's not every day we get to hear from someone with that kind of a journey, such a rich and impactful journey. And we're really grateful that you agreed to come on this podcast. Again, it's been an honor being your host, sir.
Thank you. God bless you. Take care.
Thank you, sir.